Welcome back, everyone, as we continue our look at this fantastic documentary about the Kennedy assassination, specifically looking at the events in and around the Texas School Book Depository. If you did not see yesterday's breakdown of part one, which was basically the first 5 chapters of this documentary, the link's in the description as well as a link to the original content. I encourage you to watch the whole thing first and then come back for my commentary. We'll see how far we get today. I would like to at least get to the halfway point, so I think maybe we'll go up as far as maybe chapter 9, but we'll kind of see how long it takes us to do that. So let's go ahead and dive into part 6. Or chapter 6, I guess. Part 2 for me.
As previously mentioned, Arnold Rowland spotted a white man with a rifle in the westernmost window on the 6th floor about 12:15.
And just as a reminder, this is the window we're talking about. And I want to thank everybody for their fantastic comments yesterday. A lot of disagreement about how you interpret this evidence, and that's fine. And that's part of the confusion with all of this, is that there are so many theories, and there's miscommunication by people. Some people change their stories, that kind of stuff. But there is, in fact, a museum, I believe, on the 6th and 7th floors. The 7th floor is the window I was able to look out, which is right above the 6th floor. You can go to that spot. You just can't stand in the window. They kind of have it blocked off.
But as late as 5 minutes before the shooting, Arnold observed an elderly black man leaning out the easternmost window on the same floor. He might have confused the 6th floor with the 5th, where James Jarman, Bonnie Williams, and Harold Norman did indeed lean out the windows.
These are the kinds of things, when people start talking conspiracy, I'm not suggesting that it's not possible that there was some kind of conspiracy, but it's also very possible that some of the things that we think prove or disprove something could just be bad eyewitness accounts. And I don't mean bad. I mean, it's easy to say you thought you saw somebody in the 6th floor when they were really in the 5th floor. Those are the kinds of things we have to expect could have happened.
In fact, they were the only black employees known to have watched the motorcade from a floor above the 1st. Except they could hardly be described as elderly.
But from the ground?
But then, take a listen to this.
Understand, too, if you're 18 years old, somebody in their 40s could come across to you as elderly if they have gray hair.
You describe with as much particularity as you can what that man looked like.
It seemed to me an elderly black man. That is about all. I didn't pay very much attention to him.
This question was then repeated to Arnold a few minutes later, at which point his answer had dramatically changed.
He was very thin, an elderly gentleman. Bald or practically bald. Very thin hair if he wasn't bald. Had on a plaid shirt. I think it was red and green. Very bright color. That is why I remember it.
Here's another thing that happens when you start pushing. When somebody gives you their initial account, that's probably the most truthful and most accurate you're going to get. When you start pushing, you start asking more probing questions, they're going to start trying harder to remember things, and they're more likely to start speculating and start maybe misremembering or telling you what you want to hear.
Can you give us an estimate as to age?
50, possibly 55 or 60.
Can you give us an estimate as to height?
5'8".
There's no way you could know that from the ground.
He was very slender and very thin.
Can you give us a more definite description as to complexion?
Very dark or fairly dark. Not real dark compared to some black men, but fairly dark. Seemed like his face was either, I can't recall detail, but it was either very wrinkled or marked in some way.
So, in the span of a few minutes, Arnold went from "I didn't pay very much attention" to describing the man's complexion, hair, clothing, age, height, build, and even the blemishes on his face.
Not buying it.
Sometimes some people are prone to exaggerate more than others, and without in any way meaning to take away from the testimony of your husband as to what he saw in the building at the time, just from your general experience, do you feel you can rely on everything that your husband says?
I don't feel that I can rely on everything anybody says.
Well, this is really an unfair question for me to ask any wife about her husband, and I am not asking it very correctly, but...
At times, my husband is prone to...
Wait a second. She's a high school student? She's married? I mean, I guess this is the 60s, but...
Exaggerate. Does that answer it?
I think it does.
See, that's exactly what I'm saying. The initial account was probably the most truthful. They started pushing him for details, and he probably just wanted to be done with it.
Anything else you want to add to that, or not?
Usually, his exaggerations are not concerned with anything other than himself. They're usually to boost his ego. They usually say that he is really smarter than he is, or he's a better salesman than he is. Something like that.
As leading as that line of questioning was, Barbara was not alone in doubting her husband's credibility. Officials at 2 separate high schools attended by Arnold explicitly warned authorities not to trust everything he says. He was characterized as someone who would not hesitate to fabricate a story and not tell the truth regarding any matter. Indeed, Roland lied or exaggerated on multiple occasions when he testified.
Throw it all out. Throw it all out.
Another witness who claimed to have seen a gunman in the book Depository was Carolyn Walter. Shortly before the arrival of the motorcade, Walter had seen a man with blonde or light brown hair in one of these windows on the 4th or 5th floor. She explicitly ruled out the 6th. It should be noted, however, that during the shooting, this window was closed with the blinds down, while this one, as you already know, was occupied by Bonnie Williams and Harold Norman. In any case, the light-haired man seen by Walter was holding a machine gun, and standing beside him was another man wearing a brown suit.
I can see a situation in which somebody looking at this building would think this is the 5th floor. Of course, in Europe, it would be the 5th floor. But, there's no windows, there's nothing here. I could see them easily in their mind looking at the windows and going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just getting it wrong. Instead of her thinking it was 4th and 5th, it might have been 5th and 6th.
Much like Arnold Roland, Walter assumed the gunman was a presidential guard and refrained from telling the police. In fact, there's no evidence she told anyone of what she'd seen, not even the colleague with whom she watched the motorcade. In Walter's defense, 2 other witnesses recalled seeing a man with light or light brown hair on the 5th or 6th floor, except they never saw a weapon nor an accomplice. Disagreements regarding the floors were at least in part due to the ground floor lacking visible windows.
How do you
exactly the first thing that occurred to me when I was looking at the picture of that building was that the way that the ground floor is so different than all the other ones that it would be very natural for us to just count it that way.
It's the 6th floor rather than the 5th floor.
I went with the FBI and I showed them the window, and I didn't count the bottom floor.
You mean the first time you gave a statement, you didn't count the bottom floor?
That's right.
Another source of confusion was the distinct visual difference between the 7th floor and the ones below.
When you first glance at the building, you're thrown off a little as to the floors because there's a ridge. It almost looks like a structure added onto the top of the building, about 1 story above, so you have to recount.
Not only that, but multiple witnesses described the 6th floor as the 2nd floor from the top. But in the chaos that ensued, it seems the tail end of that sentence was not always recorded. Amos Ewens is another curious witness because even though he never saw the gunman's face, he did see the top of his head. Somehow.
What did you see in the building?
I saw a bald spot on this man's head. Trying to look out the window, he had a bald spot on his head. I was looking at the bald spot.
Oswald did not have a bald spot.
How would you see a bald spot? That would literally be the last part of the guy's head you would see from outside.
Was thinning a bit in the front, but otherwise had a full head of hair. But the strength of Ewan's account is somewhat diminished by his inability to recall much of anything else.
Could you tell whether he was a black gentleman or a white man?
No, sir.
Couldn't even tell that, but you have described that he had a bald
spot in his head. Yes, sir. I could see the bald spot in his head.
Now, could you tell what color hair he had?
No, sir.
Could you tell whether his hair was dark or light?
No, sir.
Throw it out.
Long after the assassination, 15 years to be precise, a journalist working for the Dallas Morning News tracked down a man named Johnny Powell. Powell had supposedly seen 2 men fiddling with a scope on a rifle in the sniper's nest. He described their complexion as darker than white, but that was about it. Once again, one has to wonder if he confused the gunmen with Jarman, Williams, and Norman on the floor below.
This is a very general statement and doesn't necessarily apply just to this case, but just in general with a lot of historical accounts that I find myself very frustrated with. I have a hard time taking seriously any account of a historic event that comes years later and is completely different than what everybody else said. Anytime you have somebody who comes along and says, I've got the new evidence that's completely different than what everybody else who was there said all these years, unless it's ridiculously well proven, not going to buy it.
I mean, after 15 years of silence, there's no telling how Powell's memory could have been distorted.
Nah.
A good example of such distortion is Richard Carr. A few minutes before the shooting, Carr had been standing roughly here when he spotted a man on the 7th floor of the book Depository, all the way over here. The man was white and wore a hat, glasses, and sport coat.
You go somewhere and stand, how many, what did we say, 750 feet away? We're talking 2.5 football fields away, and tell me what that guy looked like in a building.
In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, Carr returned to ground level and caught sight of what he believed to be the same man now trotting south on Houston. He made a left turn right about here before being picked up by a station wagon. By 1969, however, Carr's story had notably changed. The man with a sport coat had now been standing on the 5th floor, not the 7th. After the shooting, Mr. Sportcoat had emerged from behind the book depository, accompanied by 2 other men. They too had been picked up by a separate station wagon before speeding away. It's unclear how Carr is supposed to have seen all of this, considering what he told the FBI back in '64.
Carr advised that from his location on the steel structure of the new courthouse building, it would have been impossible for him to observe the lower floors and entrance of the book depository.
And I'll say this again. The initial accounts that you give before they start probing and questioning and before you start talking to other people and before other things happen, those are going to be your most reliable. And a lot of these interviews are happening months after the event.
And that from his position, he could only see the top floor and the roof.
In Carr's defense, James Worrell had seen a man emerge from the rear entrance of the book depository about 3 minutes after the shooting. This man also wore a sport coat and headed south on Houston. Except the man seen by Carr was kinda stocky and wore a hat, while the man seen by Worrell had a slender build and was hatless. Besides, anyone connected with the shooting, leaving via the rear entrance, would surely have headed north, not towards the scene of the crime. As if that was not enough, 2 other witnesses, James Romack and George Rackley, stood roughly here for several minutes after the shooting. Both of them paid special attention to the rear entrance of the building.
Mr. Romack stated that from the time he heard the shots, he had looked toward the book depository and had, under his immediate observation, the loading dock and the back door. He stated he is positive that no one came out of this door or out of the loading dock doors.
Could you see the back door of the Texas School Book Depository?
Yes.
Were you looking towards that direction?
Yes, sir.
About how long did you keep your eyes fixed over there?
Oh, I would say 5 minutes anyhow. Probably 10. I was looking up that way at all times.
Did you see any people leave the Texas School Book Depository by way of the rear exit?
No, sir.
Did you see any people running north on Houston Street?
No, sir.
Unfortunately, conflicting accounts were not limited to the book depository. Among the hundreds of witnesses in the vicinity of Dealey Plaza, nothing was as disputed as the number and origin of the gunshots.
Yeah, and that's disputed to this day, and every so often people come out and they say, oh, we've got proof of this many gunshots, and all the other accounts are wrong. And see, even things like the gunshots are disputed because people were in different places. There were echoes. You could have had a car backfiring that people thought was a gunshot, or someone mistook a gunshot for a car backfiring. All kinds of things. This is the day of.
Was holding his stomach.
And the shots were almost simultaneously, weren't they?
Yes, sir. They were probably 10 seconds apart.
Do you know who fired the third shot?
I didn't hear I don't recall a third shot. There may have been. My family hit the ground, and I don't recall a third shot. I just couldn't. I'm not certain of that. I do know I heard 2 shots.
Yeah, I heard 3. I know
You
there
heard
were 3.
Well,
Yeah, I said.
See, so right here you got these guys. He's asking him, he's interviewing him, but he's disputing his answer like in real time.
I said to Jerry after the second shot, I said, my God, those are gunshots.
There is a recording on a police radio or something.
No one knows exactly how many spectators were in or near Dealey Plaza at the time of the assassination. Well over 200 were at some point questioned by a combination of authorities, journalists and others. Attempts have been made to consolidate the various accounts, and it's clear from all such attempts that the majority of witnesses heard 3 shots. What's a bit less clear is the source of the explosions. The gunman was either placed in the vicinity of the book Depository, marked here in red, or an area west of the building, marked in green, known as the grassy knoll. But as you can see from these pie charts, the assessment of earwitness testimony is highly susceptible to bias. It's a surprisingly subjective exercise that can lead to widely different results. Now,
things as simple as how you ask the question can help lead to a particular answer. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why different investigations came up with different results. And in all of these cases, one thing you notice is that there's no heavy majority opinion, right? Here you've got 54% saying the book Depository, 44% here, 30% here, 50% said other here. So you never get more than about half the people giving the same answer.
it's a surprisingly subjective exercise that can lead to widely different results. Nevertheless, there were a substantial number of witnesses who pointed to the grassy knoll located roughly here, and many of them were scattered throughout the plaza.
And let me just say off the bat, regardless of where you think the shots came from, your mind can play tricks on you, your ears can play tricks on you, because there are buildings there, right? And if the shot's fired here, it's going to echo a certain way. If it's fired from back here, it's going to echo a certain way. You could be standing somewhere relatively close and not hear it as well as someone a little further away. There are accounts from battlefields of people being 20 miles away and hearing clearly the shots of the battle, and people being 3 miles away and hearing nothing. It's called acoustic shadow. So again, funny things happen.
To give you some examples, August Campbell was standing near the front entrance of the book Depository, yet believed the shots had come from the grassy knoll. Meanwhile, Marilyn Sitzman was standing on the grassy knoll, yet believed the shots had come from the book Depository. Standing beside Campbell was a woman named Geraldine Reed, who believed the shots had come from the book Depository. Standing by the curb in front of Sitzman was William Newman, who believed the shots had come from the grassy knoll. One might therefore conclude that there must have been two assassins.
So this is another example of how different people can look at the exact same evidence and come to completely different conclusions. It doesn't mean there's a conspiracy. And again, I'm not saying there couldn't have been. I'm just saying that a lot of the stuff that people point to as being proof that there was a cover-up or a conspiracy or multiple gunmen, that there are plenty of other explanations for that stuff.
In the book Depository, and one on the grassy knoll. Indeed, countless authors and even a congressional investigation have done precisely that. Now, the scope of this video is not nearly exhaustive enough for me to attempt any conclusions regarding a second gunman, but I do want to leave you with this. You might have seen these unlabeled blue slices before. Well, that's how many witnesses heard gunshots coming from multiple directions. That is to say, next to no one did.
No.
All the shots came either from the east or west.
So everybody, the vast majority, the one thing everybody agrees on, right? We talked about, okay, there's no more than about 50%. In all 5 cases, you have 95% of the witnesses saying all the gunshots they heard came from the same location. That's really, really important.
Not both.
Mr. Campbell believed the noise came from away from the book depository. This illusion, he explained, may have been due to the sound bouncing off the building and other objects in the vicinity.
In fact, you know what? I want to pull up Google Maps and show you what this area looks like, because it hasn't changed a whole lot. Okay, here we go. So there's the school book depository right there. That right there where I'm pointing is the 6th floor window that they believe is where Lee Harvey Oswald was standing, kneeling right there. Okay, so now we look at the floor, or look at the ground, and it's believed that this is about where the car was when the first shot was fired, which they think may have hit like a light pole or something that was hanging over the street right there. Right here is where the fatal shot, or maybe that's the one where his neck, I don't know. But right here is where the fatal shot was fired. This is where, very famously in the Zapruder film, you see the president's head basically explode from the exit of that shot. And Zapruder was actually standing right on top of this. And it looks further than it is. I mean, it's like 40 feet. It's really, really close, right? So if gunshots are being fired there, it's going to echo off of these buildings in a particular way. If they're being fired here, same thing. So just the way this is, who knows where the shots came from based on eyewitness accounts.
Arcus Campbell was far from alone in being deceived by the pronounced echoes of the gunshots.
Yep.
Where did the noises or shots sound to you like they came from?
It was hard to tell because they had an echo, you know. There was actually 2 explosions with each one. There was the shot and then the echo from it. So it was hard to tell.
And so that also is going to confuse people as to how many shots there were and how far apart they were.
There was too much reverberation. There was an echo, which gave me a sound all over. In other words, that square is it had a sound all over. The sounds came either from up against the school depository building or near the mouth of the triple underpass. I had worked in this watchtower for some 10 or 12 years and was there during the time they were renovating the school depository building, and had noticed at that time the similarity of sounds occurring in either of those 2 locations. There's a reverberation which takes place from either location.
This auditory illusion was not a fluke. Not only did the buildings surrounding Dealey Plaza act as an echo chamber, but even experienced hunters can struggle to pinpoint the number and origin of gunshots by sound alone. Here's a quote from a book on that very topic, published a few years before the assassination.
Little credence should be put in what anyone says about a shot or even the number of shots. These things coming upon a person suddenly are generally extremely inaccurately recorded in their memory.
Especially in a traumatic situation where your instinct is self-preservation. Your instinct is not to try and figure out where the gunshot's coming from and how many there were and how far apart they were. You're thinking about, diving and protecting your family and getting to safety.
One of the authors asked one deer hunter last fall how many shots another hunter less than 100 yards away had fired. The answer was 5. Actually, only 2 shots were fired.
Employees in the book Depository were no less confused about the gunshots than the spectators outside. To give you some examples, on the first floor, Eddie Piper heard 3 shots that appeared to come from inside the building. On the third floor, Edna Case and Sandra Ellison heard nothing. Meanwhile, Stephen Wilson on the same floor heard 3 shots, came from the west.
And he's closer, right? Because he's right below it. So it makes more sense he would hear it as compared to somebody further away in the building.
Fourth floor, Elsie Dorman, multiple shots came from this building across the street.
Echo.
Victoria Adams, 3 shots from the west. Mary Hollis, 3 shots inside the building. But some employees not only heard the shots, but could literally feel the explosions shake the building.
Could you tell where the shots were coming from?
Yes, sir. They came from inside the building.
How do you know that?
Because the building vibrated from the result of the explosion coming in.
Did you know they were shots at the time?
Yes, sir. They sounded almost like cannon shots. They were so terrific.
Much like Geneva Hine on the second floor, Bonnie Williams could feel the explosions up on the 5th. It sounded to Williams as though the shots had been fired from the floor above. His colleague, James Jarman, initially thought the shots had come from somewhere below, but then changed his mind and agreed with Williams. Harold Norman, meanwhile, heard far more than gunshots.
Just after the president passed by, I heard a shot. And several seconds later, I heard 2 more shots. I knew that the shots had come from directly above me, and I could hear the expended cartridges fall to the floor. I could also hear the bolt action of the rifle.
The explosions shook the building, and a piece of loose plaster or dirt was dislodged from the ledge above and struck Williams in the head.
So I'm curious to know then the eyewitness accounts that come from other places like the depository, the school book depository. Were there anybody were there any accounts that specifically said, I heard it directly behind me, or I heard it from this exact spot, right? Because these are pretty specific accounts that are pointing to a very particular location within the building.
Meanwhile, spectators on the streets below could see them leaning out the windows, looking up at the 6th floor.
I just looked straight up ahead of me, which would have been looking at the school book depository, and I noticed 2 black men in a window, straining to see directly above them, and my eyes followed right up to the window above them, and I saw the rifle, or what looked like a rifle.
So this is important because this is corroboration of eyewitness testimony, right? These are the same men who said they heard the gunshots right above them, heard the cartridges fall, and we've got an eyewitness outside seeing those men looking up at the window that they heard the sound come from. That's pretty compelling testimony.
Frightened and somewhat entranced by the pandemonium outside, the 3 men remained on the 5th floor for several minutes. Meanwhile, the apparent assassin upstairs was now in a race against time.
Did you hear anything upstairs at all?
Running.
No, sir. I didn't hear anything.
Any footsteps?
No, sir. Probably. The reason we didn't hear anything is because, after the shots, we were running too, and that was making a lot of noise.
Why didn't you go up to the 6th floor?
I really don't know. We just never did think about it. Maybe it's because we were frightened.
Makes sense. Guy just murdered the president.
When the shooting began, motorcycle policeman Marion Baker had just made a right turn from Main Street to Houston. Baker recognized the explosions as gunfire and could see a flock of pigeons fluttering above 2 buildings further up ahead.
That's
Baker made
compelling
a
too.
split-second decision and headed for the book depository.
That's a very specific detail that I think is really important evidence, right? Because that flock of birds, I mean, it's possible they could have done that if the sound had been somewhere else, but it seems to me that is good corroborating evidence as well.
Once inside, he was greeted by Roy Truly. Truly directed Baker to the elevators, but neither was available. He pressed the button while shouting up the elevator shaft for someone upstairs to close the gate. No response. Instead, they began running up the stairs.
As I came out to the 2nd floor there, Mr. Truly was ahead of me, and as I come out, I was kind of scanning, the rooms. And I caught a glimpse of this man walking away from this. I happened to see him through this window in this door. I don't know how come I saw him, but I had a glimpse of him coming down there.
Where was he coming from, do you know?
No, sir. All I seen of him was a glimpse of him go away from me.
What did you do?
I hollered at him at that time and said, "Come here." He turned and walked right straight back to me.
What did you say to him?
I didn't get anything out of him. Mr. Truly had come up to my side here, and I turned to Mr. Truly and I says, "Do you know this man? Does he work here?" And he said, "Yes." And I turned immediately and went on out up the stairs.
The man whom Baker and Truly encountered in the 2nd floor lunchroom was none other than Lee Harvey Oswald. The encounter was brief, lasting no more than 30 seconds. Oswald appeared calm and failed to evoke suspicion, so Truly and Baker left him in the lunchroom and proceeded up the stairs. They spent some time searching the roof, but there was no assassin to be found. Down by the main entrance, Geraldine Reed was still trying to process what had just occurred. She decided to return to her office on the 2nd floor of the building. Here, about 2 minutes after the shooting, Reed became the last known person to have seen Oswald inside the book depository.
I kept walking and I looked up and Oswald was coming in the back door of the office. I met him by the time I passed my desk by several feet, and I told him, I said, "Oh, the president has been shot, but maybe they didn't hit him." He mumbled something to me. I kept walking. He did too.
So I've had some people tell me that these eyewitness accounts are proof that Oswald could not have shot the president because there was no way he could have made it down to the lunchroom in the amount of time that is stated. Number one, you can get really far in 90 seconds to 2 minutes? Number two, how do we know it was 90 seconds? This is all estimates, and time moves differently depending on your perspective, and especially in a situation where there's panic and you've just seen something traumatic. Time dilation can be a real thing there. So none of this to me says, oh, this counts Oswald out. There's plenty of reasons why he could have easily been where he was at that time.
I didn't pay any attention to what he said because I had no thoughts of him having any connection with the shooting at all, because he was very calm.
Oswald is then presumed to have taken the front stairs and, on his way out the main entrance, encountered someone looking for a phone. There are at least two candidates for who this person might have been, but Oswald seems to have pointed out the phone inside the building before blending into the chaos outside. He was next observed boarding a bus a few blocks east on Elm.
Just like that.
Nearly 4 months after the assassination, Truly and Baker participated in a crude reconstruction of the shooting to time their movements. The experiment was repeated twice. On the first attempt, it took them 1 minute and 30 seconds to reach the second floor lunchroom. Then, 1 minute and 15 seconds. These time trials were primarily conducted to determine whether Oswald could have fired the shots from the 6th floor and still made it down to the second in time for his encounter with Truly and Baker.
Easily.
After all, if there wasn't enough time, Oswald could not have been the assassin. A bunch of different routes were tested, and while Oswald could theoretically have taken one of the elevators or even the fire escape, in practice there wasn't enough time.
You do not think the assassin used any of the elevators at any time to get from the 6th to the 2nd floor?
You mean after the shooting? No, sir. He just could not, because those elevators, I saw myself, were both on the 5th floor. They were both even.
The only other means of descent was the stairway. A stand-in for the gunman trotted down from the 6th floor to the 2nd in 1 minute and 18 seconds. Then, at a slightly faster pace, in 1 minute and 14 seconds.
Easy.
There was just enough time. It's therefore possible...
It actually, not only just enough time, it works out, right? The timing fits. And again, there could be 10, 20 seconds difference in either case. So in other words, I'm not seeing anything here that says, ha, there's the proof Oswald couldn't have done it. I'm just not seeing it.
That Oswald stopped on the 2nd floor, perhaps upon hearing Truly shouting up the elevator shaft, and attempted to hide in the lunchroom mere seconds ahead of Truly and Baker's arrival. But it's not quite that simple, because Oswald was not the only person using the stairway to escape the building.
Interesting. This I don't know about.
As previously mentioned, Victoria Adams watched the motorcade from an office on the 4th floor of the book Depository. Within 30 seconds of the shooting, Adams ran down the stairs to the 1st floor along with her colleague, Sandra Stiles.
When you got to the bottom of the 1st floor, did you see anyone there as you entered the 1st floor from the stairway?
Yes, sir.
Who did you see?
Mr. William Shelley and Billy Lovelady.
Now, what did you do after you encountered Mr. Shelley and Mr. Lovelady?
I said I believed the president was shot.
Do you remember what they said?
Nothing.
Then what did you do?
I proceeded out to the Houston Street dock.
There are two significant problems with Adams' account. The first being that she and Stiles supposedly left the 4th floor within 30 seconds of the shooting and then ran down the stairs to the 1st. This would place them in approximate sync with Oswald, descending from the 6th floor to the 2nd.
Now, as you were running down the stairs, did you encounter anyone?
Not during the actual running down the stairs, no, sir.
Did you hear anyone using the stairs?
No, sir.
But okay, perhaps Oswald was a few flights above, and his footsteps were drowned out by their own. This would mean that Stiles and Adams left the 4th floor mere seconds ahead of Oswald's arrival, reached the ground floor mere seconds ahead of Roy Truly and Marion Baker's ascent, before encountering William Shelley and Billy Lovelady right about here. But this is when problem number 2 makes an entrance. When the president was shot, Shelley and Lovelady stood on the front steps of the book Depository. They spent several minutes roaming about outside before returning to the building.
See, again, people remember time in weird ways. I think in this case, we're talking about somebody who says it was 30 seconds and they just were off. None of this stuff can really be reliable. That's why you need corroborating evidence. That's why you need multiple witnesses saying the same things in order to really take it as being true.
And that's the problem. How did Stiles and Adams encounter Shelley and Lovelady within seconds of the shooting if it took them several minutes to return to the
Somebody's
building?
remembering it wrong.
Who did you see on the first floor after returning to the book depository?
I saw a girl, but I wouldn't swear to it. It's Vicky.
What is her full name?
I wouldn't know.
Vicky Adams?
I believe so.
Would you say it was Vicky you saw?
I couldn't swear.
Where was the girl?
I don't remember what place she was, but I remember seeing a girl and she was talking to Shelley or saw Shelley or something.
Shelley could recall no such incident. Presuming that Lovelady was correct and Shelley had a lapse of memory, it's possible their encounter with Stiles and Adams occurred minutes rather than seconds after the shooting. After all, Adams could have been mistaken.
And this is not a criticism of these people, right? This is a perfectly understandable reaction to the stress and the panic and the surprise and the horror and everything you would be feeling after witnessing the president get shot right in front of you, especially in the horrifying way in which it happened.
This scenario implies that Oswald made his escape, Trulian Baker went upstairs, and then several minutes later, Stiles and Adams left the building. But it's not quite that simple. Watching the motorcade alongside Stiles and Adams was their supervisor, Dorothy Garner.
Miss Garner stated this morning that after Miss Adams went downstairs, Miss Garner, saw Mr. Truly and the policeman come up.
And this is in June, so now we're talking like 7-8 months after the assassination.
Not only does this account corroborate that of Adams, meaning they left within seconds, not minutes, but it implies that Garner was in a position to observe the stairway from somewhere on the 4th floor. In spite of this, Garner made no mention of seeing Oswald scampering down the stairs between Stiles and Adams' departure and Trulian Baker's arrival. What makes this conflict so difficult to resolve is that neither Stiles nor Garner were called to testify. We have but a few brief statements of what they witnessed. All we know about Sandra Stiles is that she went down the stairs with Adams. Did it happen within seconds of the shooting? We don't know. Did she see or hear anyone else while running down the stairs? We don't know. Did she encounter Shelley and Lovelady on the 1st floor? We don't know. Authorities appear to have presumed Adams unreliable and then ignored the witnesses who could have easily refuted or confirmed that presumption. A simple reenactment like the one granted Trulian Baker could have gone a long way to resolve this issue. But that never happened. Many decades after the assassination, author Barry Ernest was able to track down Sandra Stiles, Dorothy Garner, and Victoria Adams. Stiles confirmed that she and Adams left the window within seconds of the shooting, but she doesn't explicitly say they left the 4th floor within seconds.
There you go.
In any case, as they moved quickly down the stairs, she heard no footfall apart from their own. Garner confirmed she never witnessed the descent of Oswald, despite seeing Trulian Baker heading upstairs. Adams went a bit further and accused investigators of tampering with their testimony.
I'm beginning to wonder if the Shelley and Lovelady encounter was inserted into my testimony later. I remember saying to a fairly big black man inside the building, right near the loading dock, right after I got down the stairs, that I thought the president may have been shot.
Sandra Stiles apparently told Ernest something similar.
A few people were milling around on the 1st floor. One was a black man. Shelley and Lovelady were definitely not on the 1st floor when we got there.
The only black employees who could have possibly made it to the rear stairway in time were Carl Jones, Roy Lewis, Eddie Piper, and Troy West. What you see here are their approximate positions at the time of the shooting, but during the seconds and minutes that followed, only Piper is known to have paid any attention to the stairs in the back.
And I just want to, again, pause here and say what a fantastic job he has done of digging through all of this testimony, all of these accounts, to be able to map all of this out for us in a visual way that makes it much easier to understand than reading through this stuff. And just, again, goes to show you what a first-class job he does with these documentaries. And honestly, the fact that this stuff isn't being picked up and put all over TV is just a crime because it's that good. It really is.
As soon as the shooting began, Piper crossed the first floor to get a better view of a clock. He remained in roughly this location until he observed Trulian Baker running up the stairs.
Had anybody come down the steps before Trulian Baker went up the steps?
No, sir.
Did Vicky Adams come down before Truly and Baker went up the steps?
No, sir. No, sir. She didn't do it.
Remember James Romack and George Rackley? I mean, I wouldn't blame you if you don't, there's like 100 different names to keep track of, but they were the ones who failed to spot anyone leaving the book depository via the rear entrance for several minutes after the shooting. Well, the thing is, according to both Stiles and Adams, they left the book depository via the rear entrance upon reaching the first floor. So if Romack and Rackley are to be believed, then once again, the descent of Stiles and Adams must have taken place minutes rather than seconds after the shooting. Not only that, but when Sandra Stiles was contacted by another researcher, she apparently expressed great uncertainty regarding the stairwell descent and thought it might in fact have occurred a couple of minutes after the shooting. I don't know what to make of all this. The conspiracy crowd will, of course, amplify the more suspicious elements, while those who support the official narrative will focus on that which discredits Adams. But ultimately, we don't know the exact timeline of events. It's difficult enough to pin down the minute-by-minute chronology. Once you get down to seconds, there's a lot of guesswork at play. The time trials by Trulian Baker gives us a rough estimate, but that's not cast in stone. They could have easily been a bit faster, a bit slower. So too could have Shelley, Lovelady, Garner, Stiles, Adams, and Oswald.
Would you say that the reconstruction that we did on March the 20th was a minimum or a maximum time?
Oh, I would say that would be the minimum time. We did everything that I did that day, and this would be the minimum time, because I'm sure that it took me a little longer.
I must also mention that we don't know much about the layout of the fourth floor beyond this crude schematic. If the other floors are any indication, much of this space was occupied by bookshelves and tall stacks of boxes.
Slow you down.
This is significant because Dorothy Garner never actually saw Stiles and Adams enter the stairway. She only heard footsteps of what she presumed to be them running down the stairs.
All right, so all of this is to say that chances are, as you were watching all of that, it probably confirmed what you already believed to be true, right? And this is the whole point of bias. When we go at something with a bias, in this case, if you are watching all of this and you believe, as I do, that Lee Harvey Oswald did this, right? Now, I am open to who helped Lee Harvey Oswald do this, if he was put onto it by someone else, all of that kind of stuff. But I do believe he fired those shots from that window. So, coming at it from that viewpoint, I see all of this through that lens. I see it through the lens of, well, I can discount this stuff and I can focus more on this. And I can see, sifting through all of that, I can see enough that there's nothing there that disproves to me that Lee Harvey Oswald did this, right? If you come at it from the opposite perspective, that you don't believe Oswald was involved, or you believe the shooter was somewhere else, or whatever it might be, or it wasn't Oswald but it was fired from there, you probably saw the same stuff I just saw and came to a completely different conclusion. And this is all just looking at one part, one building, right? There's the grassy knoll. There's the stuff that comes afterwards with Oswald and the movie theater and the cop that gets killed and all this other stuff, right? Imagine trying to sift through all of that and figure out what happened. And that's true with history in general. This is what we do with history, is we have to take all of these competing narratives, we have to look at them and try to sift through it without being affected too much by our own biases and come to a conclusion. And in this case, because there's conflicting reports, because different people heard and saw different things, the more uncertainty there is, as he said in here, the more uncertainty there is, the more the door is open for people to argue conspiracy and alternative theories as to what happened. That's why we have so many in this case, because there is conflicting evidence. There are conflicting eyewitness testimonies. So I'm really interested to see where we go from here. The next part is going to be the sniper's nest itself, the place where the gun's found and the casings. We're going to look at the alibis. We're going to look at the lineup. And then the ending. So we may try to get through the rest of this tomorrow. There's about 36 minutes or so left. We'll see. We'll see if we can get through it all in one sitting. But I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I have. Again, definitely check out his channel. He does so many good things like this. This is the style that he uses, at least with the ones I've seen. And he does a great job with it. So I hope you enjoyed that. We'll see you again tomorrow with the next part. Thanks for watching.